"Dad?" The dinner was canceled, my son had told me. Yet, when I arrived, they were all celebrating without me. 35 years building an empire, only to end up locked out of my own home, peering through the window like an intruder. The glass of single malt scotch in my hand trembled slightly as I watched my family. My own flesh and blood, laughing and clinking glasses at the table I had bought, the very table where, apparently, there was no longer a seat for me. I retreated into the shadows of the backyard, far from the warm lights illuminating their celebration. A profound, existential ache, not physical, shot through my chest. I took a slow, deep breath. At 58, I'd never felt such betrayal, not even when I lost millions during the dot-com bust of '99. Money, after all, can be recovered. Dignity cannot. Without a sound, I returned to my car, a sleek black S-Class Mercedes I'd bought just 3 months prior. Another symbol of success that now felt completely hollow. I started the engine and drove away without looking back. There would be time for confrontations later. For now, I needed to think, to plan my next move. Because if I'd learned anything in decades of business, it was that impulsiveness is the mother of all defeats. My name is Victor Vic Harrison, the son of a Detroit mechanic and a Chicago seamstress. Nothing was ever handed to me. By 16, I was already working 12-hour shifts in an auto repair shop. By 20, I bought my first piece of land with savings. By 30, I owned 3 car dealerships. Today, my corporate group spans everything from real estate to technology, with offices in 3 countries. But that night, driving aimlessly through the affluent streets of Beverly Hills, I didn't feel like the successful entrepreneur profiled in Forbes. I felt like the kid from Detroit, vulnerable and alone, searching for his place in the world. My cell phone rang several times. It was Madison, my youngest daughter. I didn't answer. What could she tell me? More lies? More excuses? The last time I heard her say, "I love you, Dad," was years ago, maybe when she still needed my signature for her college tuition at Columbia University. I ended up at the bar in the St. Regis Hotel, where the bartender already knew my routine. "The usual, Mr. Harrison?" he asked, pouring an aged single malt scotch. Behind him, in the mirror, I saw the reflection of a tired man, with prematurely graying hair and deep worry lines. I wondered at what exact moment my kids had stopped respecting me. Was it gradual, or was there a breaking point? I recalled buying the mansion in Bel Air, a 13,000-square-foot house that had been my proudest achievement. Eleanor, my wife, had been radiant that day. "Finally, a proper home for our family," she'd said. Robert, my older son, barely a teenager then, had walked through every room, mouth agape. Madison, still a child, had danced through the empty hallways, her laughter echoing off walls that promised to shelter us for generations. Where had that joy gone? When did it turn into distance, into coldness, into this? Maybe it was after I expanded the business into Asia. Those 3 years of constant travel, absent from birthdays and graduations. Or perhaps it started with Rob's Ivy League education, where he absorbed those ideas that everything old had to be reinvented, including filial respect. No. If I were honest with myself, the first signs appeared much earlier. When I started compensating for my absence with expensive gifts, when delegating my authority to Eleanor became the norm, not the exception. When work became my refuge, my entire identity. "Another, Mr. Harrison?" the bartender asked, interrupting my thoughts. "No, thank you. That's enough." I paid the tab and left. The cool New York City night air cleared my head slightly. I decided to walk a few blocks, something I rarely did. Midtown never slept. It was always vibrant, always in motion, like me until recently. My phone rang again. This time it was Eleanor. 40 years together since we were broke college students. She had been with me every step of the way, or so I believed. After a moment's hesitation, I answered, "Where are you, Victor?" "We're worried." Her voice sounded tight, not worried. I had learned to distinguish the nuances after so many years. "Worried? That's strange. A few hours ago, you all seemed quite happy celebrating without me." Silence on the other end of the line. I could almost see her grasping for the right words, calibrating her response. "It was a misunderstanding. Robert wanted to throw you a surprise party for your birthday next week, but My birthday is in 2 months, Eleanor. Don't insult my intelligence with such obvious lies. Another silence, longer this time. Please, come home and let's talk. No, I need space tonight. We'll talk tomorrow. I hung up before she could insist. I felt strangely liberated, as if I had broken a predetermined script. For the first time in years, I was acting outside the role of the understanding father or the conciliatory husband. I was just Victor, the man, with his pain and his dignity intact. I hailed a taxi back to a hotel, not the St. Regis, but the Four Seasons, where no one knew me. I needed anonymity. I needed to think without interruption. As the cab drove down Park Avenue, illuminated by festive lights, I remembered a pattern that had repeated over the past few years. Family meetings where my opinions were politely ignored, decisions made without consulting me, conversations that abruptly stopped when I entered the room. Small slights I had let slide, convincing myself they were my imagination or simple generational disagreements. But tonight was different. Tonight was a declaration. Dad. The dinner was canceled, Rob had said on the phone, barely 3 hours earlier. And I, naively, had accepted his excuse about a catering problem. I'd even felt relieved not to have to socialize after an exhausting day, until I remembered I had left important documents in my home office. Arriving, I saw all the cars parked, Rob's BMW, Marty's Audi, even my son-in-law Jason's SUV. And through the windows, the scene I would never forget. My entire family, plus a few close friends, enjoying a sumptuous dinner in my absence. At the Four Seasons reception, the young man behind the counter greeted me with that impersonal courtesy of good hotels. Name for the registration, sir? I hesitated for a second. Lewis Harrison, I answered, using my father's name. Another small act of rebellion. Tonight, I didn't want to be Victor Harrison, the recognizable CEO. The suite was luxurious but impersonal. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling strangely out of place. My phone kept buzzing. Texts from Eleanor, Rob, now even my sister Lucy. I turned it off. The sudden silence was comforting. I turned on the television just for background noise. A news channel talked about the economy, crises, opportunities, my professional world. But tonight, that world seemed distant, almost irrelevant. I pulled out my laptop and opened the file containing my will. I had updated it just 6 months ago after acquiring new properties in Austin, Texas. Everything was meticulously divided between Eleanor, Rob, and Madison. Equitably, generously, as befits a father who loves his family. I stared at the document for long minutes. Did they truly love me? Or did they only love what I represented, what I could provide? I recalled a conversation with Rob just a month ago. He had come to my office, unusual for him, to discuss expanding the family business into renewable energy. A good idea, in principle. It's the future, Dad. We have to position ourselves now. I agree, I'd said, but we need to study the market more, understand the regulation, the risks. His expression had shifted subtly, a mixture of impatience and condescension. With all due respect, Dad, those analyses take time we don't have. Others are already moving. Besides, this isn't the 90s. The economy has changed. Precisely because I've lived through several crises, I know that prudence isn't old-fashioned. It's wisdom. I had ended up signing the preliminary documents to start the project, not because I was convinced, but to avoid creating more distance with my son. One more concession on a long list. Now, in the solitude of that hotel room, I wondered how many of my recent decisions had truly been mine, and how many had been desperate attempts to maintain a connection with my children. Near midnight, I decided to take a hot bath. As the water relaxed my tense muscles, I made a decision. I would not confront my family with anger or reproach. That would be predictable and likely ineffective. Instead, I would act with the same strategic coldness I had used in business for decades. The next morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. I ordered breakfast to the room and turned on my phone. I had 27 missed calls and countless messages. I ignored them all. Instead, I made 3 precise calls, to my lawyer, Gary Lawson, to my accountant, and to Sarah Jenkins, my personal assistant for 15 years, and probably the person I trusted most. Mr. Harrison, is everything okay? Your son has been calling the office, Sarah said with genuine concern. Everything is under control, Sarah. I need you to cancel my meetings for today and tomorrow, and please don't inform anyone of my whereabouts. Understood. Anything else I can do for you? Yes, I need you to prepare the documents for Project Phoenix. We'll review them this afternoon. There was a pause. Sarah knew exactly what that meant. Project Phoenix was a contingent plan we had developed years ago during a time of political instability, a mechanism to protect family assets from a potential crisis. I never thought I would use it against my own family. Are you sure, Mr. Harrison? That would involve... Completely sure, Sarah. 3 o'clock at the alternate office. The alternate office was a small loft in Tribeca that few people knew about. I had acquired it precisely for situations requiring discretion. Next, I contacted Gary Lawson, my attorney of 30 years. I need to urgently modify certain documents, Gary. Can you see me today? Of course, Vic. Any legal trouble I should know about? Not exactly. I'm just restructuring some family aspects. I understand. Your usual office at the usual time? No, the alternate office today at 4. My last call was to Carlos, my accountant and financial advisor. Carlos, I need a detailed report of all transfers made from the corporate accounts over the past 3 years, especially those authorized by Robert. That will take time, Mr. Harrison. It's a lot of transactions. Focus on the ones exceeding $1 million, and I need it today. I'll do my best. May I ask the reason? Internal audit, Carlos. Nothing to worry about. After hanging up, I dressed in a charcoal gray suit, my battle uniform, as Eleanor used to call it. I looked at myself in the mirror. The man who looked back seemed more determined, less defeated than the night before. There was something different in his eyes, a spark of determination, perhaps even defiance. Before leaving, I received a text from Eleanor. Where did you stay last night? We're very worried. Please respond. This time, I decided to answer. I'm fine. Busy with important matters. We'll talk soon. Simple, distant, professional, just as they had been with me. The day went according to plan. Sarah had meticulously prepared all the necessary documents. Gary, always efficient, had drafted the legal modifications I requested, though not without some initial resistance. Mr. Harrison, this is quite drastic. Are you completely sure? Surer than ever, Gary. Sometimes clarity comes in the most unexpected moments. Carlos arrived with the financial reports that confirmed my suspicions. Over the past 2 years, Robert had authorized substantial transfers to external consulting firms, all indirectly linked to an old college friend, Mark Sterling. Services vaguely defined as strategic consulting or market research, which had cost the company several $1 million. Did you detect any temporal pattern? I asked. Yes, curiously. The largest transfers coincide with periods when you were traveling abroad. Of course, taking advantage of my physical absence, a perfect metaphor for what had been happening in my family. By 7 p.m., everything was ready. I discreetly reorganized my personal assets, modified my will, and established new authorization protocols for the corporate group. I hadn't disinherited my children, but I had set clear conditions for their future participation in the family fortune. As I signed the final document, Sarah watched me with a mix of admiration and concern. Mr. Harrison, may I speak frankly? Of course, Sarah, you always have. Don't you think you should talk to your family before making such definitive decisions? I considered her question for a moment. Did they talk to me before excluding me from their dinner? Did Robert consult me before diverting corporate funds? Communication, Sarah, is a two-way street, and they blocked their side long ago. She nodded, understanding my point, but still not completely convinced. Just be careful not to make decisions out of pain that you might regret later. Her words resonated with me. Was I acting out of pain or clarity? Perhaps both were so intertwined it was impossible to separate them. I returned to the hotel after dark. This time I found Eleanor waiting for me in the lobby. I wasn't surprised. She was always good at getting information when she truly wanted it. Victor, please, we need to talk. Her face showed genuine concern. Makeup didn't completely hide her reddened eyes. For an instant, I felt the impulse to hug her, to tell her everything would be fine, as I had done so many times in our marriage. But something stopped me, a new resolve born of the betrayal I had witnessed. "Let's talk," I replied, leading her toward the hotel bar, a public, neutral, safe place. We sat at a secluded table. Eleanor seemed nervous, fiddling with her wedding ring, as she always did during moments of tension. "Last night has an explanation, Victor. It wasn't what it looked like." "And what did it look like, Eleanor?" "Because from my perspective, it looked like a family happily celebrating without the father who gave them everything. Robert wanted to discuss some business aspects with me and Madison before presenting them to you. He knew you'd be skeptical and wanted our support first. That's all. And that's why you lied to me, saying the dinner was canceled." It was an impulsive decision, a mistake, I admit. I looked at her intently. After 40 years together, I knew every nuance of her expression. I knew when she wasn't telling me the whole truth. "What aspects of the business exactly?" She hesitated, confirming my suspicions. "The renewable energy project. Robert wants to move faster, but he knows you prefer a more conservative approach. And for that, he needed a formal dinner with Jason and external friends present?" Eleanor briefly looked away. "It wasn't just about that. He also wanted to discuss the possibility of a broader restructuring to give the new generation more autonomy." There it was. The truth, or at least part of it. A restructuring, which translated into reducing my control over the empire I had built myself. "I see. And I suppose you agreed with this restructuring." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Her silence was sufficient response. "Eleanor, we've been together for 40 years. We've faced economic crises, health issues, challenges of all kinds, always as a team, or so I believed. We are still a team, Victor. It's just that dynamics change. Children grow up. They have their own ideas, their own ambitions. I don't question their ambitions. I question their methods. And even more so, I question your complicity in excluding me from decisions about my own life, my own legacy." Eleanor seemed genuinely affected by my words. For the first time in a long time, I saw real vulnerability in her eyes. "It wasn't like that, Victor. I thought I was mediating, helping to avoid a direct conflict between you and Robert. You know how stubborn you both can be." "And lying to me was the solution? Celebrating meetings behind my back?" She didn't answer immediately. She ordered a glass of water and drank slowly, as if buying time to organize her thoughts. "What do you want, Victor? What do you expect us to do now?" It was a good question. What did I really want? Revenge? Justice? Recognition? "I want respect, Eleanor, not for my money, not for my position, but for who I am, for what I've built, for the sacrifices I've made for this family." "We all respect you, Victor." "No, they fear me, they need me, they use me perhaps, but respect? That implies honesty, transparency, consideration, none of which I saw last night." Eleanor extended her hand across the table, trying to take mine. I didn't reject it, but I didn't respond to the gesture either. "Please, come home. Let's talk together, as a family." I considered her proposal. Part of me wanted to agree, to return to normalcy, to pretend nothing had happened. It would be easier, more comfortable. But another part, one that had been silenced too long, rebelled against that idea. "I will come home tomorrow, Eleanor, but not to continue as if nothing happened. Things are going to change." "What kind of changes?" "They'll know tomorrow," I cut her off before she could insist. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work pending." I stood up, leaving her visibly worried. I felt no satisfaction in it, only a strange mix of determination and sadness. The path I had chosen wouldn't bring immediate happiness to anyone, myself included. But it was necessary, it was fair, it was inevitable. That night, contemplating the city lights from my hotel room, I reflected on the stages of my life. The ambitious young man from Detroit, the emerging entrepreneur, the proud father. And now, this man at the crossroads of his existence, facing perhaps the most personal challenge of all, reclaiming his own respect. Tomorrow would be a decisive day, not just for me, but for the entire family and corporate structure I had built over decades. And though I felt apprehension, I also experienced a strange peace. The peace of one who, after a long time living according to others' expectations, finally decides to be true to himself. With that renewed clarity, I prepared for sleep. Tomorrow I would face my family, not as the compliant father they had taken for granted, but as the man I truly was, resilient, strategic, and when necessary, implacable. I woke up before dawn, with that lucidity granted only by irrevocable decisions. The first lights of New York City were barely filtering through the sweet curtains. I dressed meticulously, a navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, a burgundy tie, my combination for tough negotiations. Every garment was a small piece of armor for the battle ahead. At 7 a.m. I called Sarah. Always an early riser, she answered on the first ring. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison. All set for today?" "Everything in order? Did you confirm the meeting at the house?" "Yes, sir. I informed them you requested a full family meeting at 10 a.m. Your wife was already aware. Your son Robert asked for the reason. I told him you would explain personally. Perfect. And the documents?" "The originals are in the sealed envelope as requested. Digital copies are encrypted in your email." Sarah, efficient as always. In 30 years, few people had shown such loyalty and competence, perhaps because she, like me, came from humble beginnings. She understood the value of hard work, commitment, and keeping one's word. "Thank you, Sarah. One more thing. If you don't hear from me by 2 p.m., send the email we prepared yesterday." There was a brief pause. "Understood, Mr. Harrison. But are you sure that extreme is necessary?" "It's just a precaution. I hope I won't need it." After breakfast, I drove slowly toward Bel Air. The city streets were coming to life, street vendors setting up their stalls, rushed office workers with coffee in hand, students heading to bus stops. The normal lives of millions for whom this day represented no turning point. I felt a strange envy toward them. Upon reaching the entrance of my gated community, the guard greeted me with familiar courtesy. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison. Your family is already waiting." Of course, they were waiting. Uncertainty breeds anxiety, and I had deliberately kept them in that state for almost 36 hours. I parked in front of the house, not in the garage as I usually did. A small, symbolic act of detachment. I looked at the limestone facade for a moment. 3 stories of modern colonial architecture that had been my pride, my refuge, my declaration to the world that the mechanic's son had triumphed. Entering, silence greeted me like a physical presence. Normally, the house buzzed with activity, the domestic staff, the television in the background, Eleanor's phone conversations. Today, only silence. I found them in the main living room. Eleanor seated on the central sofa, as elegant as ever in a beige ensemble. Robert standing by the window, wearing that Italian suit I'd given him on his last birthday. Madison, unusually serious, sitting in an armchair. Jason, my son-in-law, slightly apart, as if acknowledging this was primarily a family matter. "Good morning," I said, remaining standing near the entrance. I didn't approach to kiss Eleanor or greet my children as I normally would have. "Dad," Robert began, taking a step toward me, "I think there's been a misunderstanding that—" I raised my hand, interrupting him, a gesture I would never have made before. "I'd prefer we all sit down first. What I have to say requires everyone's complete attention." They exchanged surprised glances at my tone. Slowly, they obeyed. Robert sat next to Eleanor. Madison stayed in her armchair. Jason sat on a side chair, clearly uncomfortable. I positioned myself directly in front of them, remaining standing, the position of the speaker, the one in control. 2 nights ago, I began. I received a call canceling our family dinner. However, passing by the house to pick up some documents, I discovered the dinner wasn't canceled at all. I simply wasn't invited. "Dad, I already explained that," Robert tried. "I'm not finished," I said with a firmness that surprised them again. Over the last 36 hours, I've reflected a lot on our family dynamic, on how we reached this point where lying to me has become so natural for you. Eleanor leaned slightly forward. "Victor, it was an error in judgment. No one meant to. I have also thoroughly reviewed the financial movements of our companies," I continued, ignoring her intervention, "especially those authorized by you, Robert, during my absences." My son's face visibly paled. Beside him, Eleanor looked confused. "I don't understand what that has to do with the dinner anymore," she said. "It has everything to do with it, because it's not just about a dinner, Eleanor. It's about a pattern, of decisions made behind my back, of lack of transparency, of disrespect. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder containing the financial reports prepared by Carlos. $5 million, Robert? That's what you've transferred over the last 2 years to firms linked to your friend Mark Sterling under consulting concepts that no one in the company can concretely explain. Robert stood up. His face was now flushed with anger or shame, I couldn't distinguish. Those consultancies are legitimate. Mark is an expert in emerging markets, and his advice has been crucial for what exactly? Because I don't see tangible results that justify such an investment. What I do see is that every transfer suspiciously coincides with the purchase of properties in the name of Highview Realty, a company where, curiously, you appear as a minority partner. Madison gasped, genuinely shocked. Jason looked at the floor, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Eleanor remained motionless, her face a perfect mask. "You're misinterpreting everything," Robert said, but his voice had lost its firmness. "Am I also misinterpreting the secret meetings with George Riverton from Industrial Bank? The negotiations to sell the technology division without my knowledge? Or perhaps I'm misinterpreting the restructuring project you were so animatedly discussing during the dinner I wasn't invited to?" Absolute silence, the kind of silence that follows an undeniable truth. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Her voice, usually melodious, sounded strained. "Robert assured us you were aware of those strategies, that you simply preferred to stay out of the operational details." I looked directly at my son. For the first time in years, he held my gaze without arrogance, without condescension, only with fear. "Dad, I can explain everything. The transfers, the meetings. It was to protect the company's future. Your methods they were revolutionary in their time, but the market has changed. We needed to adapt faster." And lying to me, was that part of the adaptation? I knew you'd oppose it, that you'd want to maintain absolute control, as always. But you no longer have the energy, the vision to what, Robert? To lead what I myself built, to protect what I created with decades of work? Madison, who had remained surprisingly quiet, finally intervened. "Dad, Robert just wanted to modernize the company, make it more ours." Ours? Interesting choice of words, Madison, especially considering neither of you has spent time in every department, learning from the ground up as I insisted you do. I turned to Eleanor, who maintained the neutral expression she had perfected over the years. "And you, Eleanor, my life partner, did you also believe it was necessary to exclude me, to lie to me, to conspire behind my back?" Her eyes misted slightly, but her voice remained firm. "I believe we all made mistakes, Victor, including you. You distanced yourself from us. You took refuge in your office, in your numbers, in your projects. Family became a secondary concern for you." Her words hit me hard. There was truth in them. I knew it, but they didn't justify what happened. "You're right," I admitted, surprising them. "I have made mistakes, many of them. I prioritized work over family more times than I can count. I confused provision with presence, success with happiness." I walked a few steps across the room, processing my own thoughts out loud. "But my mistakes don't justify your actions. They don't justify dishonesty. They don't justify betrayal." "It's not betrayal, Dad," Robert protested. "It's evolution. It's the natural course of things. Children eventually take the parent's place." Take, Robert. That's the key word. Not receive, not earn, but take. And that has been your philosophy, apparently. Taking what you consider yours by right, without earning it, without respecting the process. I pulled a second, thicker envelope from my briefcase. "Due to recent events, I've made certain decisions that will affect our family and our companies." I opened the envelope and pulled out several legal documents. "First, I have modified the corporate structure of the Harrison Group. Effective today, 51% of the shares are under an irrevocable trust that I directly control." Robert turned pale. "You can't do that without board approval." "Actually, I can. Clause 17 of the bylaws grants me that right as the founder in case of risk to the company's integrity, and $5 million diverted definitely constitute a risk." I continued relentlessly. "Second, I have hired an independent external audit firm to review all operations over the past 5 years, with special attention to the transfers authorized by you, Robert." That will damage the company's reputation, he exclaimed. Only if there's something to hide, I replied calmly. Third, I've temporarily suspended all negotiations with Industrial Bank and any other potential buyer of our divisions. Eleanor intervened, her voice trembling for the first time. Victor, you're acting impulsively. This will affect the whole family and our future. The future was already being affected, Eleanor, just without my knowledge or consent. I pulled the final document from the envelope. Finally, I have revised my will and my personal dispositions. The Lake Tahoe house and the apartment in New York are excluded from the family inheritance and will be donated to the Harrison Education Foundation I established last year. Madison let out a small cry. Those properties had always been her favorites, especially the Lake Tahoe house where she had spent so many youthful summers. Dad, why are you punishing us like this? I didn't even know about Robert and the transfers. It's not punishment, Madison. It's a consequence. And as for your ignorance regarding your brother's actions, allow me to doubt. The strategic meetings behind my back included the entire family, apparently. Jason, who until then had maintained a prudent silence, dared to speak. Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, I think we should all take some time to reflect. Decisions made in anger are rarely the best. I looked at him with a mix of surprise and appreciation. Of everyone present, he was perhaps the one with the least to lose directly, yet he tried to mediate. You're right, Jason. Anger is a poor counselor. That's why I waited 36 hours before making these decisions. They are not the product of anger, but of clarity, of finally seeing the truth of my family situation. Robert, regaining some of his usual composure, adopted a more conciliatory tone. Dad, I recognize I made mistakes. The transfers might not have been completely transparent, but they had a legitimate purpose for the company. And the meeting the other day, yes, we should have included you. It was a mistake to exclude you. A convenient mistake, I countered, especially considering you plan to present me with a fait accompli, the sale of the technology division and your ascent to CEO with expanded powers. His expression confirmed my words. Eleanor seemed genuinely surprised. Is that true, Robert? You were going to sell the division without consulting all of us? For the first time, I saw a crack in the united front they had presented until now. Robert avoided his mother's gaze. It was a possibility I was evaluating. The offer from Novatech Group was too good to ignore. Novatech Group? Eleanor seemed increasingly confused. But they are direct competitors to Madison Developments. Madison Developments, our real estate division named after our daughter, was one of the pillars of the corporate group. That Robert considered strengthening a direct competitor was, at the very least, questionable. It was a complex strategy, Mom. It involved several phases that would eventually strengthen our market position. Or your personal one, I suggested, considering Novatech offered you a seat on their board, according to my sources. Again, revealing silence. Madison abruptly stood up and walked toward the window, visibly upset. I can't believe you were willing to sell the division that carries my name, Robert, the one Dad created specifically thinking about my future. Business decisions can't be based on sentimentality, Madison, Robert replied coldly. Sometimes you have to sacrifice certain areas to strengthen others. Sentimentality? Is that how you see the family legacy? The fracture between them became more evident by the moment. Eleanor seemed caught in the middle, divided between her loyalty to her children and to me. Enough, I finally said. The decisions are made, the documents signed. From now on, things will work differently in this family and in our companies. What exactly does that mean? Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. It means total transparency, formal documented meetings, consensual decisions, and real consequences for anyone who breaks these rules. I turned specifically to Robert. You remain Chief Operating Officer, but under direct supervision of the board, which will now be chaired by Gary Lawson. Gary, your lawyer? But he doesn't know the business like I do. He knows ethics and legality better than you, apparently, and he will have the authority to approve any transaction over $500,000. Robert clenched his fists but refrained from protesting further. He knew he was in a legally vulnerable position, considering the questionable transfers. As for you, Madison, you will continue as Director of Public Relations, but you will now report directly to Sarah, who has been promoted to Deputy CEO. Sarah? Your assistant? Madison didn't hide her indignation. My assistant, who has demonstrated more loyalty and competence than many executives with degrees from prestigious universities, who knows every corner of our companies because she has worked with me for decades, not because she inherited a last name. I turned to Eleanor. As for us, Eleanor, I think we need time and space to reevaluate our relationship. I've reserved the apartment in Midtown for a month. I'll move there temporarily. Her face showed genuine dismay. You're leaving? Just like that? I'm leaving so I can think clearly, without the constant influence of a family dynamic that has become toxic. It's not an abandonment, it's a necessary pause. Robert, always the strategist, attempted one last approach. Dad, I understand your disappointment, but this reaction is extreme. We could talk this all through calmly, reach reasonable compromises. The time for compromises is over, Robert. Now is the time for consequences and reconstruction. If you want to remain part of this family legacy, you'll have to prove it with actions, not just words. I walked toward the door, feeling an immense weight lift from my shoulders, but also a strange liberation. For the first time in years, I was acting on my own terms, not the ones others had subtly established for me. I suggest you reflect deeply on what you truly value, on the kind of people you want to be, not for me, but for yourselves. Reaching the threshold, I stopped and turned back one last time. And remember something. Respect is not demanded, it is earned. Love is not manipulated, it is cultivated. And family, true family, doesn't conspire, it builds together. I left without waiting for a response, gently closing the door behind me. There were no shouts, no pleas, no immediate promises of change, only a silence that spoke louder than any words. In the car, I took several deep breaths before starting the engine. Part of me expected someone to run out, to ask me to reconsider, to show some genuine sign of repentance. No one did. As I drove away from the house that had been my home for 2 decades, I remembered something my father used to say. A man without self-respect is like a house without a foundation. It might look impressive from the outside, but any tremor will bring it down. I had allowed the foundations of my dignity to gradually erode in the name of family love, peace, and convenience. Today, I had begun to rebuild them. My phone rang incessantly throughout the drive. I ignored it. I needed this silence, this solitude to fully process what had happened. Arriving at the Midtown apartment, a modern, minimalist space I had acquired as an investment years ago, I felt strangely at peace. The white walls, the simple furniture, the absence of family photos or memories, it all represented a blank canvas, an opportunity to redefine myself. Sarah had sent staff to prepare the place. The fridge was stocked, the bed made. There was even a vase of fresh flowers on the coffee table. Small details that reflected her efficiency and thoughtfulness. I called her to confirm everything had gone as planned. "How did they take it, Mr. Harrison?" she asked after the practical details. As expected, surprise, indignation, some attempts at manipulation, but I think the message was clear. "And you? How do you feel?" It was a simple question, but it caught me off guard. Few people in my life genuinely asked how I felt. Tired, sad, but also somehow at peace, as if I had stopped carrying a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. "I understand. Do you need anything else for now?" "No, Sarah, you've done more than enough. Take the rest of the day off." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison, but I prefer to finish some pending items. The restructuring will require a lot of paperwork. Always dedicated, always professional." "As you wish, and Sarah, thank you for everything." "Nothing to thank me for, sir." After hanging up, I sat on the minimalist sofa facing the large window that offered an impressive view of the city. The sun began to descend, bathing the buildings in a golden glow. My phone rang again. This time it was Jason, my son-in-law. I decided to answer. "Mr. Harrison, I just wanted to tell you that I respect your decision, and I'm here if you need to talk." His sincerity surprised me. "Thank you, Jason. How is Madison?" Shaken, but reflective. "I think your words impacted her deeply, especially about Robert and the division named after her. I didn't intend to create division between them. I know, but maybe they needed to see the truth, all of us." There was a meaningful pause. "Mr. Harrison, I didn't know about the transfers or the potential sale. I swear." I believe you, Jason. You've always been the most transparent one in the family, ironically. Thank you for that. And there's something else you should know. Something I overheard a few weeks ago, but didn't know how to interpret until now. His tone had changed, becoming more cautious. I'm listening. Robert has been in conversations with foreign investors, not just for the technology division, but possibly to sell the entire group. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Are you sure? I heard him on the phone. He mentioned total group valuation and post-sale leadership transition. I didn't want to believe it then. I thought maybe it was some hypothetical strategy, but now? Have you mentioned this to anyone else? No, sir, not even Madison. I didn't want to create problems based on something I partially overheard. You did well to tell me now, Jason. I appreciate it. Mr. Harrison, may I ask what you plan to do? I considered the question carefully. For now, verify this information. Then, act accordingly, as I always have. Understood. Count on me if you need help. I will. And Jason, take care of Madison. She's caught in the middle of all this. Always, Mr. Harrison. After hanging up, I remained still, processing this new information. The possibility that Robert was considering selling the entire group, everything I had built with decades of effort, was almost inconceivable. Yet it fit the pattern of behavior I had uncovered. How far would his ambition go? What was he willing to sacrifice for money and power? More importantly, what was I willing to do to protect my legacy? Night fell over the city as I contemplated these questions. The lights of the buildings flickered on one by one, creating an urban landscape of artificial stars. I felt simultaneously small and powerful, vulnerable and determined. Tomorrow would be another day of battle. But tonight, in the solitude of this apartment stripped of family history, I would allow myself simply to be. A man facing the reality that perhaps he had built an impressive empire, but had failed to pass on the values that sustained it. And as sleep finally reached me, a crystalline certainty formed in my mind. I would rebuild whatever was necessary, companies, relationships, trust, even if I had to do it brick by brick, like that young man from Detroit I once was. A week after that confrontation, life had taken on a strange new normalcy. The apartment in Midtown, initially impersonal, was beginning to reflect my essence. A few strategically placed books, a painting I had rescued from my office, my old wood-turning lathe installed on the balcony, a hobby I had abandoned years ago for lack of time. My mornings had a different rhythm, no usual rush, no underlying family tensions. I ate breakfast peacefully while reading the entire newspaper, not just the business section. I walked 20 minutes in the nearby park before heading to the office. Small, rediscovered pleasures. On the professional front, the storm raged. Robert had tried to legally challenge the changes in the corporate structure, only to discover that every move I made had been meticulously executed within the legal framework. His frustration was palpable at the board meetings, now chaired by Gary, where every decision was documented with pinpoint accuracy. The information provided by Jason turned out to be true. Robert had been in advanced negotiations with an Asian conglomerate to sell the entire group. Sarah had intercepted emails confirming it. The external audit had also revealed other minor but significant irregularities in his management. As for Madison, the situation was more complex. She had requested a private meeting with me 3 days after the confrontation. We met at a discreet cafe in Soho, neutral ground for both of us. "Dad," she had said, her eyes reflecting a mix of regret and determination. "I need you to know I wasn't aware of everything Robert was planning. The sale of the division, the transfers. I found out the same time you did." "I believe you, Madison. You've always been more transparent than your brother. But that doesn't absolve me of responsibility. I participated in meetings behind your back. I stayed silent when I should have spoken, and I did it because part of me believed it was time for a generational change." Her honesty had disarmed me. She wasn't looking for excuses, but for an acknowledgement of her role in this family crisis. "Generational change is natural, inevitable," I replied. "What's unnatural is trying to force it through deception." We talked for hours about expectations, communication, respect, and finally, reconstruction. "I want to earn my place, Dad. Not because I'm your daughter, but on my own merit. That's all I've ever wanted for you, Madison." That conversation, had marked the beginning of a new understanding between us. Not an immediate reconciliation, but a solid foundation on which to rebuild our relationship. With Eleanor, the situation was different. She had respected my request for space, communicating only for practical matters, until yesterday, when she invited me to dinner. Not at home, but at that small Italian restaurant where we had celebrated our first wedding anniversary decades ago. I found her waiting for me, elegant as always, but with a vulnerability in her eyes she rarely showed. "Thank you for coming, Victor." "I couldn't turn down an invitation to this place," I smiled slightly. "You remember?" "I remember every important detail, Eleanor. That's been part of the problem, perhaps. Remembering what we were makes it more painful to see what we became." The dinner unfolded with memories and confessions. She talked about how, gradually, she had felt me drifting away, taking refuge in work, delegating not only domestic decisions, but also the emotional connection with our children. "I don't justify what happened, Victor. I'm just trying to understand it, understand us." "I know, Eleanor. And you're right about many things. I emotionally distanced myself. I confused provision with presence, but that doesn't explain or justify the conspiracy behind my back." "No, it doesn't," she admitted, "and I've had to confront my own complicity in all of this, my silence when I should have spoken, my acceptance of behavior I knew was wrong." By the end of the dinner, we hadn't reached a final resolution, but a deeper understanding. We needed time, both of us, to heal, to reflect, to decide if our path would remain together or take separate directions. And now, watching the sunset from my new space, I received the call I had been expecting all week. "Robert, Dad, we need to talk." His voice sounded different. It wasn't the confident, slightly condescending tone of before, but something more human. "I'm listening, not over the phone, in person. It's important." We agreed to meet at my office the next day, not the corporate headquarters, but that alternate loft in Tribeca, where I had initiated this family transformation a week earlier. That night, I slept surprisingly well, with the tranquility of one who has regained the helm of his own life, regardless of the storms that might still lurk. Robert arrived promptly, unusual for him. He was dressed more soberly than usual, without the ostentation that often characterized him. He sat across from me, with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, genuine vulnerability. "Dad, I've come to tender my resignation." It wasn't what I expected. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "The audit has revealed irregularities I can't adequately justify. The transfers to Mark's consultancies, some questionable operational decisions, the unauthorized negotiations with the Asian conglomerate." "Why, Robert? Why risk everything? For money? For power? You already had both." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that painfully reminded me of the boy he once was. "I don't know, Dad. Ambition, I suppose. Impatience. The feeling that I was always in your shadow, that I would never be enough. I never asked you to be like me, Robert, only to be honest, hardworking, and principled. I know that now, but for years I felt like I was competing against an unreachable giant, and at some point I decided that if I couldn't beat you by playing fair, I'd find shortcuts." It was the most honest confession I had heard from him in years. There were no elaborate excuses, no complex justifications, just the raw truth of his own weakness. And now? Now, I accept the consequences. I resign from my positions in the group. I will return every dollar of the questionable transfers. And, he paused as if gathering courage, "I apologize, Dad, not for the specific actions, but for the betrayal of your trust, for failing not just as an executive, but as a son." The silence that followed was charged with decades of intertwined expectations, disappointments, love, and pain. Finally, I spoke. "I accept your resignation, Robert, and I appreciate your honesty, however late it may be." He nodded heavily, as if expecting this response. "As for forgiveness," I continued, "it's a process, not an event. It requires time. It requires actions that back up the words. I understand. But it also requires an opportunity, and I'm willing to give you one." He looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Your resignation from the corporate group doesn't mean the end of your opportunity to demonstrate who you truly are or who you can become. I explained my proposal. He could start a new venture, separate from the family group, but with my mentorship. His own startup, where he could prove his worth without the shadow of the family legacy, but also without the automatic privileges it entailed. You'd give me that chance? After all, I'm giving you the chance to earn your own respect, Robert. Mine will come as a natural consequence of that. When he left, there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine humility and perhaps the beginning of wisdom. The following months brought profound changes to our family dynamic. Madison took on greater responsibilities in the group, but from a position of constant learning, not entitlement. Eleanor and I slowly restarted our relationship with honest conversations and necessary space. Robert began his independent project, facing for the first time the real challenges of entrepreneurship without the Harrison safety net. I experienced the most significant transformation myself. I rediscovered simple pleasures, reconnected with neglected friendships, and found a healthier balance between work and personal life. I even started teaching at a local university, sharing not only business knowledge but also life lessons with young people who reminded me of myself decades ago. A year after that night, I discovered my family celebrating without me. I hosted a dinner at my midtown apartment, now completely transformed into a space that genuinely reflected who I was. Everyone arrived. Eleanor, Madison, and Jason, even Robert, who had maintained a low but constant profile in his process of personal and professional redemption. As we shared dessert on the terrace under a starlit sky, Eleanor discreetly took my hand. Who would have thought that canceled dinner would lead us here? I smiled, gently squeezing her hand. Sometimes you have to lose something to find what truly matters. Madison raised her glass. To Dad, who taught us that respect isn't demanded, it's earned, and that it's never too late to start over. We toasted under the stars, not as the perfect family we once pretended to be, but as imperfect human beings learning to value each other, not for what they possessed or represented, but for who they truly were. And in that moment, I understood the deepest truth of this experience, that the true legacy consists not of companies or properties, but in the integrity with which we live and the dignity with which we treat each other. Because in the end, as my father the mechanic used to say, you can lose everything and still be rich if you keep your dignity. Or have everything and be the poorest of men if you've lost it. And I, Victor Harrison, at 59, had rediscovered the most fundamental wealth, self-respect and the authenticity no one can take from you unless you decide to hand it over yourself.